Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions and the law. My name is Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. In this episode, I interviewed Erika Holmes. Erika is the founding attorney of ELHolmes Legal Solutions, where she provides individualized, affordable legal services. She's also a lawyer's lawyer when it comes to legal ethics. So who better to have on the podcast to talk about ethical innovation in the profession? The sponsor of this podcast is 650, a business and employment legal document automation tool. You can get 10% off when you use the code LAWSubscribed at checkout in their document marketplace. For a 650 subscription, tell them that Law Subscribed sent you to get a 10% discount on your annual subscription. For me to make a personal introduction between you and 650, click the link in the show notes called Get Connected with 650 and enter your contact information. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode.
Erika, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so happy to have you on the Law Subscribed podcast.
I am so excited to be here and talk about that doing subscriptions. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm so glad you're here. So we got introduced through Chicago Bar Connection, and that's because you're doing some really innovative things. And you came highly recommended as somebody I absolutely need to talk to because the subscription model's in your wheelhouse. And so that's about the best I think I could do right now to introduce you. So please, for the listeners, for the audience, give a better introduction for yourself, please.
Okay, well, and actually, I'm going to also in that give a shout out to Jess Besnard with the Chicago Bar Foundation and the work that she does at Ali J there, Legal Entrepreneurs for Justice, because she's the one who hooked us up together, and she's the reason I do subscription. So I just definitely give her a shout out to begin with. I'm Erika Holmes. I am coming to you from Denver, Colorado. I have a solo practice, ELHolmes Legal Solutions, focusing on family law and attorney ethics and regulation. I got into subscription, going back to giving Jess credit for that, is just being an alternate form of billing. But to be honest, I was a little bit resistant to it at first. I liked the concept of doing it and do alternate billing in my practice normally. I do all flat fees and I do all unbundling, but I didn't see how this was going to work in a family law situation. So as much as I was telling the world that this is a great way of doing it with alternate billing, I wasn't able to really apply it to my own practice. But just kept nudging. And then I also need to give some credit to Kim Bennett. I think it's Kay Bennett Law, and she is in Atlanta, Georgia, and she's a huge specialist on knowing how to do subscription billing. And because of that, I should say, wanted to bring her in for institute here, the Solo and Small Firm Institute. It's just, like one of those 2.5-day CLE credit things for her to do subscription billing. And talk about it. And as part of that, we wanted you get more people if you offer ethics credits. So I am, the other half of my practice. So I learned about the ethics for subscription billing in Colorado. And so that we did this presentation together. And when she was talking about it, again, she was like, you can do this in any practice area. And I'm like thinking, yeah, except for family law. But they got the ball churning in my head, and actually I figured out how to do it more and bring it into my ethics side of my business, and then I figured out how to bring it into my family law part of the practice. And so now I would say like a quarter of my clients are on subscriptions.
So in other words, what I'm hearing is just get started with it. Try it in one aspect of your practice, and then you're going to understand it. You're going to learn how to do it, and it won't be as scary anymore. And then before you know it, you're going to want to adapt it to other areas of your practice. Does that sound right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Just never say never, and just be creative. And yeah, once you get your toe in the water, you're going to want to jump in for sure.
So I know that you said that Jess sort of was encouraging it and introducing you to it, but like take me through the process in your mind of, when you first had the need or saw the need, that Jess was explaining to meet, that made you want to say, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try the subscription model. What was that process like for you?
So it was between Jess and Kim, they put that challenge in there. So I was actually, I do have to say, I was looking for how can I possibly do this? Because it just sounded really cool and interesting. So I was on the lookout for it. And so I added a new area to my practice, which is succession planning for solo attorneys, not like for retirement, for like you get hit by a bus and who's going to take care of your client's succession planning. And so I set up the succession plan, but then every year I want to start checking in with them. It's like, like estate planning. And they had used that as an example of when you could do subscriptions, as that once a year or, every 6 months you do a check-in or whatever the client is wants. So that was the first way I could see it working into my practice. And then from there, it was actually bringing in the advice piece. So maybe you could say I brought it in because I was starting to get kind of annoyed with some of my clients, because in family law, well, actually I'm both, but I do unbundled, right? And so I would do the service for my client and they would call back, a little bit later if they, simple questions, no big deal, but some of them were calling back. And, because I do unbundle, I don't, charge by the hour. So there's really no way for these short little phone calls for me to bill for them. And I was getting annoyed because this was starting to take up a lot of my time. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I could put them on a subscription and explain to them what they were going to get every month. And then surprisingly, when you get paid for it, the calls become less annoying. So that's how I brought it into to the first way that I brought it into the family law side of my practice.
Okay, yeah, that sounds really interesting to me. And as you know, I'm having more and more of these conversations with innovative attorneys like yourself, and that seems to be a common theme: is how can I, capitalize on basically free legal advice it doesn't make sense to bill for in a traditional way, or it doesn't quite fit into whatever billing model that you're currently using, and yet these are also people that need legal advice, but they're also willing to pay. Otherwise, they wouldn't have even paid you for your unbundled services, right? So there's sort of a happy middle ground. It sounds like you were able to come to, and you were able to find a price where it sounds like that made sense to them, that they'd be willing to pay this month over month after, your unbundled service, where they could keep calling you with questions. So at least it sounds like you found what that number was for your clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a little playing around with it. And the other thing that I was hard to it was a hard nut to crack was, how do I also do this not on a time basis? Like you buy 30 minutes or 60 minutes or 90 minutes of advice, like a month kind of thing, because it really is this part, really focusing on the advice of it. So, but I finally cracked it. I was so excited. And so it's based on like number of phone calls. And then if there's certain amount of like a little bit of doc review I'll do in there, but it's all, defined for my client ahead of time, so they know exactly what they're getting. And then if anything that they're asking for is outside of what I defined as a subscription, then they pay that flat fee for whatever that is. Like if they, want a document actually drafted, that's not for me, it's not in my subscription model. So then they pay extra for that. So it was playing around with what I wanted to be in my subscription model, what I was comfortable doing. And then in terms of price, it's figuring out what my clients were comfortable with. And also an interesting piece in developing all of this was finding that there was different client interest of why they wanted the subscription. So people that, were going through the process for the first time, they just wanted, a lawyer on call, like, how do I fill out this caption? Like, very process oriented. And then when their, divorce is done, then they end their subscription, right? But with we call them post-decree clients, the ones that are having problems, with child custody later on, they are much more wanting the safety of having a lawyer on call. So I have one client, and I modeled this part, her subscription more to her, was she was terrified of opposing counsel, like just it was like she was taking anxiety medicine because of this opposing counsel. So she did not want to deal with opposing counsel at all. So her subscription is like 5 conversations with opposing counsel a month, and so that I could do that for her. And I don't talk to opposing counsel very often. We've gotten a lot of these things worked out, and so every time every month I send out the bill, I'm thinking, why are you still paying it? And she happily pays it every month. And with her at this point, even though she's not using it, it's still a safety blanket for her. And so she happily pays it. I start feeling guilty. So in the middle of the month, I'm always like, hey, how are you doing? Like, I check in with her. But that's what the value is to her, and what she is paying for with the subscription. So it's been interesting to see how the subscriptions work for the clients too.
Yeah, gosh, there's so much to unpack there, and there's so much I also want to get to with you. So I don't know, I may have to have you back in another episode, but let's unpack this first and see where we take it. So the last thing you said so many good things there. And I'm excited to go back and listen to this interview again before I publish it to look at that and break all that stuff down. But the last thing you said, I think, was really important, because that's another big issue for attorneys that are looking at adopting the subscription model is why is my client going to keep staying subscribed? What's the incentives that are built in so that I could actually have revenue that I can rely on, on a monthly basis. And like you said, for this client, having the safety net is enough. But then you said you do something else, which I think is really important. And that is that you call and check in, right? Even if they're not using your services. And right now, if I'm on a billable hour model and I just call to check in with a client, hey, I'm calling you so I could bill you, right? But with the subscription model, you're calling to check in because they are paying you. And even if they're not using your services right now, they might use your services and they're paying you for it. So they know when they call on you, they need you, you're going to be there with whatever was agreed to in the retainer, and you're going to be there to do that. And then if they need more, like you said, flat fee on top of that, right? Which I think is a really innovative way to adapt the subscription model, because one client can't fit into every single box. And another thing you talked about was you have a very unique subscription for this one client based on his or her needs. So that's another, interesting thing is, do I just have one type of subscription and everyone subscribes? It sort of depends on the practice area and depends on what you're able to do and how flexible you are. But then you certainly have to manage that, right? You have to manage the different types of subscriptions. So my question for you is, how do you manage the different types of subscriptions, especially when you have like a one-off client that needs a very unique subscription?
So I want to be flexible for my clients, but with what you're asking, I don't want to make a different subscription for each client. That would just be a lot of work on me in terms of oh, this client gets this or this client gets that. So I start off with my basic, 5 questions, I'll do review, online forms, do a verbal review, or I'll, 1 page of an email or something like that. And then, so I get very specific of what I feel comfortable and that what the base is for the subscription. And then if I get a client that it's finding out what they need, because it's all really about doing heavy client intake. This one was easy. like I just switched the phone calls from her, from her to the attorney. And I don't do any of the doc review, and she's not going to need it. So this one for me was kind of very simple and a no-brainer. And if other people want this in the future, I can keep this as an option, but I'm not going to change for every client. And so if what I'm offering isn't an easy package to put together in terms of subscription, then we're not a good fit for each other in terms of the subscription. So it's flexible, but at the same time, like I use the word manageable, keeping it manageable in terms of the different types. But that's for me, because I love simple. Like I think simple gets a bad rap. So I keep things simple in terms of like the different packages that I offer.
So talking about those packages, then how many different types of packages do you offer? Is it like I could just leave it at that, but I am specifically curious about, are there like tiered levels? So here's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and like you call them different things, and they, it's a more suite of services, or is it here's, an unbundled thing, 5 phone calls, 5, emails, and then depending on which of these you want per month, I'm able to price that for you. Like how do you set that up?
So for me, the different packages that I have are for the different, like more for the different practice areas. So I've got one that's like family law, when they're going through the process, family law, more post decree. And then with ethics, I have a service, I do a ethics health check. So usually for newer attorneys, where I help them understand what most of the ethical rules are going to be that apply to their practice and go through their fee agreement, blah, blah, blah. And so there's work that I do up front for them. And then they do a subscription after that of, again, having that attorney on call if they have any ethical questions. And so I've got a subscription. I know what package I offer them. And then I also am outside ethics counsel for law firms. And so that is a different package for them. So those are more of how my packages are different, is based on what that client, what area my practice is and what that client is wanting specifically. And at this point, I leave in my fee agreement that, what we're doing is based on the information that I have at the time about what your needs are, blah, blah, blah. And especially like with I call them more my corporate clients, like when I'm working for the law firms, I put in there that after 6 months, every 6 months, we're going to do a review, and I'm going to keep data in the meantime of how many calls I'm getting, how much review I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. So that after that 6-month period, we both look at the value. And if they're not using me as much as I thought they would, I'll lower the price for them. If, things are working, then we just keep the same. And if I'm doing more work than I anticipated, then we're going to up the price. So it's, I haven't had to do that yet, but that's my plan, and how I keep it open for if I need to do that in the future.
That's excellent. And I think that goes to another aspect of client retention in a subscription, where if there's a set time period, like for you, it's 6 months, where you check back in. If they're not using your services, you're willing to lower the price. And I think that's something I haven't come across yet. And I think, again, that's super innovative. And that's a way for clients to know, okay, I'm going to keep paying this every month. And then at a certain time period, depending on actual usage, and I do want to know from you, what kind of, how you actually track that, but then your clients will know, okay, well then I know, for the next 6 months, it's going to be, potentially less. Or then if we're really calling every single day and we need more services, well, then it makes sense to be paying more and have a more suite of services. So that regular check-in, however regular it is, that makes sense for you and your clients, is super interesting. I'm really glad, you shared that. So with the tracking of the phone calls and everything, like, is this something you're just tracking in a spreadsheet? Do you have a software? What kind of technology are you using to make sure that you're collecting the data accurately?
So I use Clio, is my case management system. And I'm not the most tech savvy person in the world. And so one of the things that I do track, but it's not based on this for my client, is I do track my time, and what I'm doing, like per task, like how much time I'm spending on the phone versus, how much time I'm doing like simple doc review. Or for my corporate clients, I will do a little bit of drafting for them. It's, all defined in there. So, when I do it that way, I can see the number that, of how many calls I'm getting in, and then for my own purposes of how long these calls are taking. And so it's different ways that's pretty much how I track most of my data at this point.
Okay. So, so part of the calls that are included with your subscription package, it's not a time constraint. So if they call and they need to talk to you for an hour, you're just going to track that. So, at the review, they're really taking up a lot of time. I have to charge them more, as opposed to saying, you get 5 30-minute calls. And then when 30 minutes hit, time, that goes into the next call or something like that. So that's how you've decided to do that. Is that right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah. And actually that it's very purposeful that I do it that way, because when I started and I didn't know any other way to do it, it was more of the time thing. And even so, when you do it by time and you say you get up to 60 minutes a month, going back more toward like my family law clients or whatever, under the ethic rules, if they don't use the 60 months, if you frame things correctly, they still pay for it. It's like basically 60 minutes up to, and if you don't use it, they're going to pay for it anyway. What I was finding was very confusing for my clients was like, if they didn't use all the time, then does it go over to the next thing? And it was just getting that whole billing, the hourly billing out of both of our brains. So, so that's when I started coming up with other data to be able to offer that service. So like up to 5 questions, they don't count that as much, in terms of like, oh, I've got this much time or, backs, and it keeps them focused on different things. And it's also more attractive to the client because I'm not giving them necessarily a cutoff. Like with my corporate clients, like that's unlimited calls. But I know from talking to like past counsel for them about how many calls come in a month. So that's where my data started with. And so that's where I can start tracking if it goes up or down and that kind of thing. And so, and by saying to the client, like, you get these amount of questions or this amount of doc review, and that it's just much more conceptual for them to understand what they're getting. And also when they go outside of that scope too. So it gets very confusing for the client, and also for me too, if you're doing it based on the time thing. And what I want to point out with that is people freak when I say that, because they're like, oh, I'm going to get that client that, you say you get 5 questions and they're going to be like, I've got 1 question with 18 subparts. And, like they're going to take advantage of the fact that you do put some type of number out there. For one, I get being concerned, that that's going to happen. I was concerned about that when I started subscription. It doesn't happen. People are respectful, and also do good client intake. If you client seems like they're going to be kind of annoying about that, then don't offer them the subscription. But for one, I find that people, especially when you're really good at defining what the service is at the beginning, they're very good at respecting it. And so I wouldn't be as afraid of that, that it's going to be abused. And if it is being abused, you also can cancel the subscription. And so, even with my clients, the review is in 6 months, but they are on a month-to-month subscription. So if I get a client and they treat me like crap for a month, well, guess what? I'm not renewing their subscription. So the worst I'm out is had, a crappy month with this one client. So the benefits so outweigh that risk, that I really encourage people to again, put that toe in the water and see that it doesn't happen very often. And if it does, you do have recourse to shut it down.
So, so then tell us then, if you're not going to, you don't have to share all the secret sauce, but you said it comes down to essentially, clear communication and clear understanding from the, from the client, and for what you're telling them, for what they can expect. And, is that in the retainer agreement? Is that just something that you establish, a rapport with the client? What does that look like? Share as much as you can of the secret sauce there, because that's super important. That I feel like the whole thing falls apart if the expectations aren't clear.
That's correct. And also let you know that I don't believe in secret sauce. So there is such a huge client or pool of clients out there that want this, that it's like, I'm not fighting with anybody for this. It's so, and if I share my fee agreement or whatever my concepts are, then the more people are going to do it. And if more people that are doing it, that's going to just get the word out where I'm going to get more clients. So I believe in sharing, and that ultimately it's going to help the legal community, but it's going to come back and help me too. So I don't have secret sauce. So, but what is my sauce? So what are the ingredients that go in the sauce? It's definitely verbally. I mean, when you're explaining to your client, what the service is going to look like, and that you give a really good explanation to begin with. But then for ethical reasons, you really need to have that also in your fee agreement. So it really is defining things like up to 5 questions a month, up to this number of pages of review or whatever, and just being super clear about that. With your verbally and in writing. And also it's going to be, it can be a little, the first months might be a little bumpy in terms of the client not really knowing like what they can do or whatever. And so, and you need to be able to put up boundaries. So another thing that I found is very helpful is that with the fee agreement that covers the subscription, I also include a copy of my fee schedule for the flat fees and the services that are outside of the subscription, so that they can easily see what they're asking for. Oh, that's on the list. So I'm going to pay, I need to pay for this. And so they start getting a better concept. And then they also know, like, if they want it, like what it's going to cost. So that I have found very helpful, again, for keeping those boundaries. And the other thing in terms of keeping boundaries is, so the first client that I felt was possibly abusing what I was offering, and it was a post-decree situation, and he kept wanting me to review all the stuff that was coming from opposing counsel. And I was like, I'm like just getting really frustrated, but I'm like, this is outside. Like, does he not read his fee agreement? And so I'm thinking this guy is, trying to take advantage of me. And so, I start, do I want to blah, blah, blah. Well, he's an ass. Like, that's his personality. He's just going to push everything. So when the next time he was just like, oh, I need you to review that, I'm like, okay, I'll do that, but it's going to cost you this. And he's like, okay. And then, so it was really me being the one that was like, this is what the boundaries are. And then let the client determine if they're going to continue to follow that or not. And so he's still on subscription because we figured that one out. So if he goes outside of Cutler's outside the lines, I tell him that he is, and then he pays for it. So again, it's that communication piece is always key.
When I went solo, I pivoted from mostly litigation to a transactional only practice. I did not have a database of documents to automate. That's why a business and employment legal document database and automation tool like 650 is super useful. I can rely on the quality of the documents in 650's database since they're putting excellent legal minds to work curating and updating their documents and automations over time. When you're not billing by the hour, outsourcing and efficiency matters, and 650 can help you scale your practice to get high-quality documents drafted in less time. Use the code LAWSubscribed at 650.com and when being onboarded to get 10% off. If you're not a business and employment attorney, or you have your own documents that you'd prefer to use, then my next sponsor, Gavel, is the automation tool for you. Gavel allows you to build shareable, client-facing workflow and document automations. In other words, Gavel helps you create a legal practice where attorneys can monetize the value they bring clients in productized form at scale via subscriptions and flat fees. Use the code LAWSubscribed at gavel.io to get 10% off an annual subscription. There's no one right way to automate and scale your practice, But with one or both of my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, you can take your subscription law firm to the next level. Links to both in the show notes. Now back to the show.
And I don't know why, but I could speculate one of the reasons he stays on is because, well, first of all, you're probably very good at your job, but also, one of the reasons we're here is this subscription model thing must be really appealing, and attorneys simply aren't offering it. You're in the first batch really of attorneys that are out there that are doing this kind of a thing. And so, in addition to the quality of your services, you're standing out. And I think, if he goes to any other family law attorney, especially, they're going to bill by the hour. And before you know it, he's not going to be able to afford it at all. So I think that, at least I could speculate that that's part of the reason why he stays on. And I'm so glad to hear that you stood up for yourself and you said, this is the fee, and he's paying it. I mean, I think that's an incredible story. But I do want to backtrack just a little bit, because you're saying so many good things. And something I just wanted to try to highlight, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that one of the reasons you were able to develop the subscription model that you have, it sounds like to me, is because of your experience, is that you've been practicing law for some time, and that you've been in these areas of practice for some time, where, and however long that is, 6 months, a year, several years, where you could look at a case and you could look at a type of, service that you're offering, and you could say, I know how many times approximately I'm going to have to speak with opposing counsel. I'm going to have to speak with this client because I practiced family law for so long. I know the steps that are involved, and I can then sort of systematize that, even though it could be court related, litigation related, that you're leaning a lot on your experience to form the subscription, since it's based on practice areas primarily are your different subscriptions. Is that accurate?
No.
Okay, that's okay. Then why? Correct me, please. How is it then that you're able to do this?
I've actually only been practicing and started my firm in 2016. So I haven't been out there doing it very long. And before that, I was with a medium-sized firm for like 18 months. And that's my private practice experience. Before that, I clerked with the courts and did more like administrative stuff with my legal career. So I never wanted to do billing. This is like, I'm just like, this is awful. You hear about chasing the bills or chasing the money, and then people fighting over their bills and and this like shuts that down. Like, I collect up front. If they don't pay at the beginning of the month, then I don't do the service, so it got rid of that fear for me. In terms of knowing like more substantively what somebody, with family law versus ethics, like what they're going to need in their subscription. I do have some experience with that, but especially with the ethics part of my business. I wasn't practicing the ethics part of my business when I started offering the subscription. So I just call other people and I'm just like, hey, like, how long does this take you to do? And saying how long, just to try to like get like a base fee for things and stuff. And so it was really finding, just being curious what other people were doing to get an idea of what my clients would want for that. But I'm making it up as I go along. And that's the thing, like with the next subscription, you learn from one and then you just apply it to the other. But even if you get it wrong the first time, it's such a better way of practicing law for you and for your client that I'll blow my fee happily, like versus going back to hourly. And, because you're making something now, you could, capitalize on that more, or you can, switch things around and learn from each experience. But it's so worth it, even if you might not hit it the first time, and likely you probably won't hit it right the first time. But it's again, you can get a really good estimate, even if you've never done it before, just talking to other people, and just put your toe in the water. Just do one.
So I just want to, before I ask you the next question, just want to clear one thing up. You said you're making it up as you go along, just in case any of your clients actually listen to this episode. That's not the law stuff you're making up as you go along. That's you're adapting the subscription model to your practice of law as you go along. Is that what you meant?
Sure, we'll go with that answer.
Okay, because you know what you're doing as far as the law is concerned. Well, law is a practice. It's a practice, not a perfect, right? So We are learning as we go. That's what we learn in law school. Whether or not that's the right thing about legal education, they do think you have to teach how to think like a lawyer there, and that's part of it, is making it up as you go along.
Well, and the other part of that, putting those two things together, is that if you're learning a new area of the law, you get yourself a mentor, right? That has done it. So find somebody that's doing something subscription, and trust me, they're going to want to talk about it as much as I do, because it's so fantastic. And then have them help you. There are people out there, or call me. I'm fine. I do. I love
all of Erika's contact information will be in the show notes too, so you could reach out to her there. And that's great, because that is what I wanted to open up a little bit is, okay, so you don't know an area, and ultimately that's what I was going to lead to anyway. So it's actually kind of great. I was wrong with what I guessed about you, because I was like, well, okay, so somebody doesn't know how to do this practice area. How do they learn it? But it sounds like that's what you had to do. So mentorship, you said, is one of those ways. How do you find a mentor? How do you know who to call up? You ask other lawyers. How do you do the market research? Bar associations, are they the answer? Is it, places like the Chicago Bar Foundation? Like where do you go? Number one. And number two is, well, maybe I should reverse this. How do you find out where to go? And then how do you go about going to those places and those people and reaching out?
Well, I would definitely say, try to start local if you can. So with our bar association, actually, part of putting this section together, it's the Modern Law Practice Initiative. And so they address all different issues of how to do modern representation, but billing is obviously a big part of it. So definitely see if there's anything local like that, search through the CLEs, home studies, that kind of stuff, especially if you're going to get credit learning about all of this. But then if you need to go bigger, if you're not finding it locally, go bigger and just start Googling it. With Kim, the way that I actually met her, bless her heart, is that I wanted to do the CLE on subscription billing. And I had heard of her through Jess, and also, just checked her out on the web, and she has a podcast that's free. And so finding her that way. But when I was doing the proposal for the CLE, it's one of those things that's like, do I ask this person if they're being willing to do it with me? And then the proposal doesn't get accepted, and you're like, thank you, they didn't like, we got rejected. Or do you say, I want to do it with this person, and then if you get accepted, then you contact that person? I went with the latter one. But when we got accepted, they directly contacted Kim and said, oh, thank you for doing the CLE. And she had no idea that this was coming. And so I'm emailing her, I'm so sorry, and explain the situation. She was so gracious about it. And she has become obviously a huge contact and educator in this whole thing. So don't be afraid to cold call people either, to get the information that you want. Because like I said, it's such an amazing thing to do. It changes the way you practice law. It changes the way basically you live your life, that people that are doing it are going to be happy to talk about it. So just throw the net out there, and don't be afraid to even cold call people. So.
And that's something we actually have in common, because I've been looking into this whole subscription thing since about 2018. And I was completely unrelated at I think it was like an ABA CLE or some kind of event. And it might have even been like a tech show presentation. And somebody brought up how, when I think of subscriptions in law, I think of Kim Bennett. And I was like, ooh, Kim Bennett. I haven't come across Kim's name yet. This was early on in my research of the subscription model. I said, I'm going to reach out to this Kim. I'm going to search her. And I reached out, and sure enough, she's so kind that we hopped on a Zoom and we started chatting. And this was in like the early months of the pandemic is when I first got to meet Kim. So, she's great, and she's established herself as an expert in subscriptions.
And she teaches too. I mean,
yeah.
That's part of her business model, is actually teaching people how to do subscriptions, and a coaching type. She does classes, but she's got these free iPads. And so, yeah, right there's a resource. So,
Right. So you've talked a little bit about the ethics side of things a few times. So I do want to get into that, because I know that this is a question that gets asked by attorneys when they're looking at the subscription model, and no legal advice here, right? No, there's no legal advice that's given. This is all just legal, to the extent there's any legal information. It's just information. Most of the listeners are attorneys, so they should know that. And so this isn't a legal question per se necessarily. But Erika, Are subscription models ethical?
So I also have to qualify it that I know Colorado law when it comes to ethics. So this is also information about Colorado law. But I do know enough that different states handle things differently. So you definitely need to check your rules to make sure. Most likely, it seems like that it is, but the way that you specifically go about doing that is going to be different from state to state. So definitely check your rules. But the big answer is yes, you can absolutely do this ethically, at least in Colorado. No, 100%. So, because I've talked to Supreme Court justices about this whole concept. And yes, you absolutely can do this ethically, but there are things that you need to be aware of in your rules. So again, this is just information about with Colorado, is the way that it is ethical is that because your fees have to be, you have to earn your fees. There has to be a benefit to your client. Well, if they are on a subscription, let's say it is just for advice, but they don't call that month, then how did you earn your fee? So under Colorado law, the way that is that you, it says that you're allowed to charge a fee if you are forsaking other business opportunities to take care of that client or service that client. So the fact that that I have set aside that time, whether they use it or not, I have foregone other business opportunities, and therefore that's what the value is. But I also have to make sure in my fee agreement that that is pointed out. So in my fee agreement, it says that you will be you will take priority as a client when you call, and that I will get back to you within 24 hours. Now that's 24 business hours. So if they call on a Friday, I don't call them back till Monday. And it's also to make contact with them. I don't have to come up with a complete answer for them within 24 hours, but I need to start the process and put them as a priority and my client. So that under Colorado law, that is how it is ethical. And it's easy to meet the ethical obligations. You just need to know what they are.
Okay. And so just to clarify, one question I have is that goes in the retainer agreement before you I'm going to follow up with you in 24 business hours?
Yes, because that's part of my guarantee to them, and that's what makes it ethical. So yeah, absolutely, it's in my fee agreement.
Okay. All right, great. We're rounding towards the end here. I just have a few more questions for you, but something that you just mentioned, I do want to touch on, and that is you've talked to, did you say state Supreme Court justices about this issue? Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Or yeah. And in Illinois, our state Supreme Court justices are also looking at this as an access to justice issue, and subscription billing being a way that people who otherwise can't afford, what I'm calling the legacy model for law firms, they can or should be or could be able to afford an attorney offering a subscription service. So in what ways do you see the subscription model helps not cure, but be part of the solution to the access to justice problems that this country has?
Well, in Colorado, it's for the same reasons the Supremes are happy to talk about this. It's the access to justice piece for them also, and client satisfaction and affordability. I mean, the clients know what they're getting. It's a set price. They put the value on it. So they're getting what they want at a price that they think is appropriate. So at least in Colorado, with the statistics, 70% of litigants go through civil litigants go through the process without having attorneys. Well, but that's across the whole spectrum. So we're talking about people that, they're just above that line, that they don't get the free legal services. They're like Colorado Legal, like CLS and that kind of thing. And then there's people at the top of the line that they want the white gumshoe or whatever you call those law firms where you get cappuccino when you sit down. They want to pay that, but 70% in between and it's not because they can't afford a lawyer, it's because they think they can't afford a lawyer. And so letting them know that they can afford it and that it can be done in a way that's in their best interest. And trust me, it is in the lawyer's best interest too, because it's a moneymaker. They often, the clients overestimate what they need. Like their comfort level isn't what they're doing it for a value that I wouldn't necessarily put it on, like the client that just doesn't want to talk to opposing counsel. So they're getting the value that they want at a price that is very different than what they would get with legacy. I like that term, with a legacy law.
Yeah,
and it feels good.
Yeah. It feels good to help people that wouldn't have paid, wouldn't, at least didn't think they could afford an attorney before, and you're showing them that they can. And something you said that's really important is lawyers, it's okay to, make money while providing access to justice, right? I think that that's okay. And that's one of the things lawyers have to look at is this is a scalable business model where with the billable hour, you can only bill 24 hours in a day. And even if you do that, that's probably unethical, right? So, and the only way you could scale that is hire another lawyer. And associates can be expensive to hire, small firm, large firm, depending on what type of business model you have, associates could be expensive. And then yet that's part of why you set your billable rate is what it is, because then you need to hire someone else to bill more hours in a day. But with the subscription model, as long as you're doing it ethically, you could scale your practice like never before. And so I have a question for you, something that another guest I had on the show, and I don't know if his episode's going to air before or after yours, since we're just launching Law Subscribed as I'm conducting your interview. But he proposed an interesting idea, which was make it a public service type thing for a subscription model, where whether it's, we didn't get into the nitty gritty, and I'm interested to talk with somebody from Legal Services Corporation about this idea and have someone on the podcast as we sort of fleshed out how you would go about this. But he thought, if say $20 was the bare minimum of just being able to talk to a lawyer once a month, or however you want to, structure that subscription. If there's a way that you can make it either state by state or federal government, where you could maybe opt in on your taxes or something where the $20 is coming from somewhere per client per month. And then as an attorney, you could sign up with that service to offer your services to those clients. It would be the same thing as having to go out there and get these clients at $20 a month. The bare minimum. We're looking at this from a pure access to justice standpoint here, right? Mm-hmm. And so if I go out there and I get 250 clients at $20 a month, that's $60,000 a year. Or the government can give them to me, and I have to fulfill this at least bare minimum service, to them. As you somebody who's offering a subscription model. I'm sorry to put you on the spot here because I don't think I prepped you for this because of how everything is. We didn't talk about this in the pre-interview chat. Is that something that you'd be at least interested in or open to, is signing up to provide that access to justice service, but you're making some money along the way? Is that something that you'd consider, or what would need to change for you to consider it?
I absolutely would consider it. I do something like that now, which there's an organization, I think it's national, but at least it's in Colorado, it's called Project Safeguard, and they help with protection orders for domestic victim survivors. And they have gone to doing a flat fee for attorneys for covering a protection order hearing. And so granted, what their flat fee isn't what I would charge a private client, but it's enough to cover my bills. I consider that my part of my access to justice work and fulfillment of that piece through my business for doing that. So I had never thought about if they had asked me to do, to take on a couple clients on a subscription basis. But yeah, I mean, as long as I know that whatever that rate is for me is going to cover like the expenses or whatever, then I would happily do that, and I guess I would be at a lower rate. And it also just feels good. And when you're doing your pricing, not by this in this area we charge this amount of money per hour, like it's not being based on random numbers, and what you actually need to cover your expenses, and that that's getting taken care of, then you can build it into your business model that I'm going to be doing X amount of work each month at this, subscription level or whatever. So you can make it and you can build it into your business and say, I can take up to 2 clients for this, a month. And then you know what your limit is. So very long answer of saying yes.
Great. No, it's great. That's great. Because this is a new thing. I never thought about the subscription model as like a public service before. And so I am curious to hear from attorneys right now using the subscription model as to what they think about it. So I really appreciate that answer, that thoughtful answer. Thank you. My last sort of big question for you is it goes to something that I've learned because I'm not really so much anymore, but for over 9 years, I was an active leader in the American Bar Association, and access to justice and equity in the profession is something that's super important in that organization. But yet even the 2021 data on the profession shows while there are more women being admitted to law school than men at this point, leadership at law firms is still predominantly white men and not women and not attorneys of color. And certainly there's a retention problem, and the report goes into that. But what I'm looking at is the subscription model as sort of the way for women and attorneys of color and other attorneys that the legacy model isn't working for them, that the subscription model is a way, I think, to sort of have your own autonomy and basically say, and let the legacy model die on the vine and go out and start a subscription practice and maybe even build it up to a big giant firm that uses a subscription model. I don't know what that's going to look like. But most of the attorneys that I'm speaking with that are launching or are working a subscription model are women or attorneys of color. And I found very few, white men who the legacy model, looks like them and it's been working for them, feel the need to adopt a subscription model. And so that's been, a revelation in working on this project. So I just would like to know your perspective on that. And if you see the subscription model as a way to make law work for attorneys where the legacy model has not worked for them. I know that's a big last question to ask you. We only have 2 more minutes in the show. No, I'm just kidding. Take your time. And if you need to think about it, think about it.
I guess I see doing subscription and alternate billing in general as a great way to build a firm. It's doing things different right now. It's a niche market, so it's easy to build your client base because you're doing things that are different. So I think it's really helpful for anybody to do it. But if the regular model isn't working for you, this is a great alternative. I guess because the traditional model is not working for such a high percentage of women and people of color that they have to find an alternative. And if you do, it's better.
And the subscription model is working for you, so maybe it could work for them too.
Oh, if I can do this, anybody can do this. And I actually want to add on to that with my areas of law are obviously family law and attorney ethics, but you can do this for any area of the law. I was challenged to come up with different concepts for what I do. So it applies to everything. And the more niche that you make it and make it your own service that's different, the more it's going to help you. And also that profitability level too. I'm totally going in a different direction with answering this question, but like being outside ethics counsel for law firms, I think there's like 5 attorneys in Denver that actually do it. So those firms value my services differently than with family law, because there's a ton of family law attorneys out there. So again, that goes to client value, and I have no idea how I went off on that tangent.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's great that you offer legal services to law firms on the subscription model, because now they are introduced to the subscription model. right? And that could change the profession right there. So my actual last question for you is a hot dog a sandwich, and why?
For someone who doesn't eat hot dogs, but that's a very Chicago question, I think. Yes, it is. Because you can call anything that you want, anything that you want.
Good answer. I like that. That might be my favorite one so far. Erika Holmes, thank you so much for coming on the show. Please tell my listeners where they could find you, where they could reach out. Obviously, everything will be in the show notes, but how do you prefer to be contacted?
Email and I do it all: email, text, and voicemail. So my email is Erika, ERIKA, at ELHolmeslaw.com, and then my phone number is 303-653-9120, and that's also my cell phone. So I take texts on that also.
All right, Erika, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for sponsoring this show. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with someone you think would find value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn, since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email Kurbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.